Well, on behalf of everyone at SIREN and our advisory committee, we are so excited to have you join us today for the SIREN Engagement Grant informational session. I'm Danielle Hessler-Jones, and I'm going to be introducing a couple of other very important people here today that are going to be sharing information with you about the engagement grant. We're going to be walking through the different components of the grant application process and answering your questions at a couple key points along the way, and then opening it up to Q&A at the end. Wonderful. So for those of you who are not familiar, SIREN stands for the Social Interventions Research and Evaluation Network. And I'm one of the three co-directors at SIREN, which is housed at the University of California, San Francisco. And our mission is to improve health and health equity by advancing high quality research on healthcare sector strategies to improve social conditions. And there's three main ways that we are seeking to advance that mission. One is catalyzing high quality research. And so you may have seen research that individuals within the SIREN network have conducted themselves, or you may have seen some of our newsletters or briefs that are trying to catalyze and summarize that. We're seeking to collect and disseminate research findings. And so we do that through a number of ways, including some that we'll share with you at the end of this session today, such as podcasts, our website and our newsletter. And then we also have different convenings of researchers and practitioners through a couple of national research meetings, as well as specialized webinars and methods talks or hot topics in the area of social care and social care research. And so who we are, well, you've just met me. I'm Danielle. I'm one of the co-directors, and I'm a professor of family and community medicine here at UCSF. And I'd also like to introduce two very important people here. Yuri, who you're going to be hearing from in a few moments, who is our senior research associate here at SIREN, and Injiri, who's one of our advisors. And you'll see a list of our advisors here at the right. Throughout this process, we've had an amazing advisory committee who's been working very thoughtfully and collaboratively to put together this RFA, and who will also be reviewing the applications, and we hope then supporting throughout the process the grantees through further support and coaching. So that's our fabulous group of advisors here. And so on that note, I'm going to hand over the virtual mic here for a moment to Injiri to tell us a little bit of more background about the purpose of this call for proposals.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Danielle. And I'm so glad to be here with both you and Yuri today. So today we're going to be talking a lot about this grant and what the purpose of it is, and also what the purpose of SIREN is and what brings us to do our important work here. So if we go to our first bullet point here, we wanted to emphasize how important it is to have that partnership between researchers and communities. As a patient advisor and patient representative myself, I care very deeply about how representation happens at the research level, at the patient engagement level. And this is one of the ways that we try to make sure that social care research is attuned to that impact. When we think about the next part, part of the reason why we even engage in the work that we do here is because we know that there are very real gaps in funding and resource infrastructure for partnerships that allow them to be focused on community engagement, patient, individual, and advocacy, and consumer advocacy engagement. And so we definitely need opportunities for there to be more mentorship, for researchers and also mentorship for community partners. And so we are trying our best to be able to create a platform in order to make sure that these gaps can be addressed. And that's why we're here today. That's why SIREN is definitely pleased to announce this grant and this opportunity. And it focuses on addressing the gaps that we talked about before, as well as improving the partnership between communities and social care researchers. And so this grant is focused on strengthening those partnerships. And also it is guided by an advisory committee. So being a member of that advisory committee and sitting on it, I have been like just brought along this incredible journey of being able to meet other advisors, communicate with them, but also kind of like put all of our heads together and make sure that this grant opportunity, when it comes out, will actually positively impact communities that I sit in and also communities that other patient advisors are a part of as well. And so we're trying to be inclusive and holistic in our design for this grant to make sure it truly addresses the very people that we're trying to help support through our social care research. And with that, I'll pass it back over. I think Yuri, you're next. So passing the mic over to you. Oh, actually, Danielle, my bad.
And thank you so much for that. Many of you will have already been familiar with seeing the RFA language on our website or through various means of receiving the announcement. But what we want to do now is walk through each part, and we're going to be pausing at a few key points to take questions and answers and to see what this brings up for you. So starting right in, related to the objectives, as Anjiri just shared, at the heart of this is that we want to support researchers and community organizations or groups to develop, sustain, or expand partnerships related to social care. So our overarching objective is that we want these grants to increase social care researchers' capacity to partner with community members. And we want to increase community members or groups' capacity to partner with social care researchers, right? The two sides of this equation. And our ultimate goal is for individuals and communities impacted by social needs and social care interventions. And here we're going to be referring to those individuals as individuals with lived experience to be more deeply involved in the social care research to advance racial health equity. So that's our overarching ultimate goal. We do want to acknowledge that this grant was generously supported by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And so SIREN has been awarded this grant from our WJF to be able to enable allowing for the small grants program to move forward. So a lot of the questions that we received so far from the excellent questions you sent to us via email or when you registered for this event today were around eligibility. Who's eligible, which organizations are eligible, which partnerships. So I'm going to walk through these 2-3 slides about eligibility. And then I promise I'm going to pause and I'm going to open it up to some chat and raising of hands to talk about eligibility, because I'm sensing that might be where a lot of the questions may be. So first, eligible applicants. Again, this particular grant mechanism is designed for social care researchers and their community partners. And the next slide, we're going to define that and have everyone get to think more about, how they're identifying as one or the other. For this particular mechanism, applications must be based in the United States with the applicants and the work being based in the United States. And while either the researcher or the community partner may serve as the prime applicant, we do encourage joint applications wherever possible and with separate budgets. And that's to ensure fair compensation and distribution of funds. So that's not a requirement. It could be a sole prime applicant, but we're encouraging those partnerships and to think about where those partnerships can come together in the application. Okay, so eligible applicants. There's a lot of lot of terminology, right? Like there's a lot of different terminology, and I'm sure that we all define things a little bit differently. And so here is our working definition of social care researchers and community partners when thinking about the applicants in your partnerships. By social care researchers, we mean investigators or teams who conduct research on healthcare sector strategies to improve social conditions. And so eligible settings include academic-based research, research arms of nonprofit organizations, and there's some examples listed there. And again, we're going to welcome your questions if this brings up questions for you of whether or not you or your group identifies as a social care researcher. And then by community partners, we mean organizations or groups that engage, advocate for, or create intentional space for individuals who are impacted by social needs and social care. So here we have some examples. It's not limited to this list, but examples would include social service, community-based organizations, community health centers, community action or advocacy groups, community consumer or patient advisory boards. And then we've got one more slide here before we open it up, thinking about the eligible partnerships. So after thinking about eligibility in terms of how you're identifying potentially as a social care researcher or the community partner, thinking about the partnership, here we have some examples of partnerships that would be eligible for this grant opportunity. So this is not a full list, but examples include an established partnership between social care researchers and individuals with lived experience. So for example, this might be a patient advisory board or group, or an established partnership between social care researchers and community partner that engages individuals with lived experience. So an existing partnership. On the other hand, it could be a new standing advisory board composed of prior lived experience advisors on social care research, or a new partnership between social care researchers and community partners. So here, this could be new, it could be building on an existing partnership, but the two key elements are still there. And we do want to note that the focus of this opportunity is on the meaningful involvement of individuals and communities impacted by social needs and social care. So one important thing to note here is that partnerships that are solely focused between professionals or organizations, so partnerships that don't involve individuals with lived experience would not be a good fit for this particular opportunity. So with that, I am going to pause for a moment, and I'm going to invite anyone who has questions so far on anything presented, but particularly around eligibility, to type your questions in the chat or to raise your hand. Great, thank you so much. I'm starting to see some of the questions come in. So so one thing to note is if you have specific eligibility questions that you feel you're not able to raise here today, yes, we want to connect with you. This is not your only opportunity. We're going to be having 2 ways that you can get in touch with us after this presentation if you feel that you weren't able to talk about eligibility enough. And that's going to be both through writing in a question on the poll that is going to be at the end of this session, as well as our email addresses is always open. I want to go ahead and call on Leslie first to share.
Hi, thanks very much. Leslie Wright, I'm at Kaiser Permanente in the Institute for Health Research, and I do a lot of community-based community-based participatory research. I was noticing in the objective, it said to be more deeply involved in social care research that advances racial health equity. So is it like if we're interested in, for example, LGBTQ disability, should we also focus then on the intersection between different communities and BIPOC communities?
I think we would, I don't want to speak on behalf of the whole committee that will be reviewing these applications, but I think I want to give a heart there as well, as Yuri was showing, to encourage that.
Okay, great,
And
thank you.
That would be greatly aligned with the ultimate goals.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for that great question. Rebecca. Did I lose Rebecca?
Sorry, I forgot to unmute there.
Oh, no problem.
We are a nonprofit organization who provides services to the public, and we would partner with a research team, and we want to find out the like the effectiveness of our outreach, essentially. So would we then to make sure that individuals' lived experience are included? How would we incorporate that into this scenario?
And so, remind me again, sorry, who's the social care researcher and who's the community partner?
Yeah, so I'm the community partner, I guess, nonprofit organization. And we have a research team in mind that we've worked with before. But no one on those teams are recipients of the services.
And so that's a great question. And so in this scenario, you've got these fantastic two ingredients of your community partner and your social care researchers. And then what we'd encourage you to do to meet the eligibility and the goals of this project is considering how you can involve individuals with lived experience in that. So for instance, could this be through your community setting, developing a patient advisory group that's advising that partnership, or could there be other ways that that either organization could consider in directly involving individuals with lived experience?
Okay, so in a way that would be like 3 different entities partnering.
Right.
Okay.
And the individuals with lived experience might be directly already in a relationship with one group or the other. So either the social care researchers, or they might be receiving services through your community-based organization, or otherwise connected to you.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Here, and then I don't want to neglect the chat, as I know several individuals have been so wonderful of putting in questions in the chat. So Katie, to your question, what if we're a social care researcher who works at a federally qualified health center? Well, first I would say that's so wonderful. Thank you. That's amazing. And then I think, of course, it has to do with where you want to go in terms of the activities and the goals of your application. So you're already, it sounds like the group is already potentially meeting criteria of both social care researchers and a community setting. And so, of course, wanting to think about how you're involving individuals with lived experience. And so it may be in that case that your partnership is your organization with individuals with lived experience, and it's not involving another organization. Or it could be an opportunity that for instance, you want to build more relationships with other social care researchers, so or other community-based organizations. So I think in that particular case, I would say just based on your scope, and feel free to come off mute if my response wasn't helpful there.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you. And I apologize because I've asked that question before and you all had answered it, but I just wasn't sure. It sounds like we would be eligible based on the fact that, so I'm a researcher at a federally qualified health center. So we certainly have the interaction with patients, but obviously we would need to embed patient, persons with living experience like our patients, and that it could be like a self-contained project as long as we're engaging patients, and that's a focus of the grant. Is that correct?
Correct.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And Catherine asks, would prior collaboration on a grant count as an established partnership? It certainly could. And again, both new relationships and established relationships are both welcome. So that's, that's not an eligibility criteria that it needs to be established, but prior collaboration where you're showing that you're building on a partnership, can of course allow you to potentially go further within the timeline and building on that relationship and that partnership. So, so yes, that could potentially count as an established. I'm going to do a quick time check with Yuri. Yuri, do I have more time or should I start answering in the chat?
I think we can move on and then prioritize maybe some questions for the latter Q&A.
That sounds great. Thank you all. I can please continue to put questions in the chat, and we'll start to field them in the chat, and then at the Q&A closer to the end of the hour. These are such fabulous questions. So then after thinking about the partners and this partnership, a natural next part of the application is thinking about the activities that you seek to do through this funding. And so, from our perspective, we're feeling that funded activities should promote the development, the strength, and the sustainability of the partnerships. And that can take a lot of different forms. We provided some examples in the RFA. And again, we do not want you to feel limited by these examples. We put them out there for consideration. And so these examples include activities to expand existing partnerships to focus on social care related issues. So maybe there's an existing partnership that is focused on a different area. And it's not social care. And this partnership could move into discussing and focusing on social care. Or it could be activities that build the capacity of social care focused partnerships. So, so here there's a social care focused partnership that potentially could consider adding interpretation services to engage populations with diverse primary languages. Or it could be building capacity for additional trainings for researchers and community members participating in the partnership, such as facilitation skills, power sharing. Or it could be building capacity of the partnership with existing participants offering training to other research community partnerships. So maybe you're going out there and disseminating training. It could also be activities to develop community-driven social care focused research agendas or sets of research questions or dissemination activities. So really spanning from the very conception and the very beginnings of thinking about what should we be asking in research, all the way to the end of the dissemination activities of how are we bringing information back to different groups, including, very importantly, individuals with lived experience. And again, we want to emphasize eligible activities are not limited to these examples. We do feel that proposals should always include more than one-time engagement of the individuals with lived experience. So that's the one thing we'd say for us is a must. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Anjiri.
Thanks so much, Danielle. So as we've gone through the different eligibility criteria for this grant, as well as discuss some of the keynotes around the grant and how it's used and its purpose, we do want to emphasize some of the review criteria, like what we'll be looking for once you submit your application to determine if this is a good fit for your particular application. So we do expect to fund between 4 and 6 grant proposals of various amounts, depending on those proposals and the requested budgets received. As a member of the advisory committee, I will also be reviewing all of the proposals for grants along with my colleagues in SIREN, so that way we can make sure that we're appropriately monitoring for the right criteria and that those criteria are being met. So what are these criteria that we're looking for? We kind of split them into 4 categories. The first one is around scope. So we do want to make sure that individuals and organizations and activities in the application demonstrate a clear link to experience, practice, and evaluation of social care and the advancement of health equity, especially around racial health equity and social care. I know that a few of you asked in the chat about how do we define social care? We've included some definitions in the chat as well. But this is to make sure that your grant proposal fits within that scope of advancing health equity and the experience and practice and evaluation of social care in general. The second criteria is meaningful engagement. We do want to make sure that at the end of the day that this highlights partnership between research and individuals and researchers and communities. And so we want to make sure that the extent to which communities and individuals with lived experience are meaningfully integrated into their project is taken into consideration. And this includes sharing of kind of power, decision-making, and authority, thinking about equitable compensation and what patient engagement involvement looks like in the proposal, as well as co-development. For example, experience-based co-design and other parts of that might be taken into consideration here as part of the criteria where patients are actively involved in the development. The third criteria that we look for is benefit. So we do try to measure and make sure that the proposal is measurable in terms of benefit and impact. This is super important so that way we can understand what's actually going to be the outcome of this proposal. What are we actually going to fund and how is that benefit going to scale? And so by benefit here, we mean the extent to which the project will benefit all members of the partnership, both during the proposed activities, but also beyond the project period as well. And this is important to us because we'd like for as many of these proposals and projects to have extended kind of benefits, even beyond the scope of the project time period itself. Lastly, when we think about the actual impact, we're thinking about the extent to which desired impacts are relevant, clearly defined, and linked to planned activities. We want to make sure all aspects of the project relate to the overall scope, relate to meaningful engagement, and relate to the benefits that we want to measure. And we want to make sure that those are clearly outlined, defined, and organized, so that way we can make sure that the grant funds are being used appropriately. And then even though this is not a formal review criterion, we do ask that you use as little jargon as possible and explain any acronyms. This is to make sure that there's language inclusivity in terms of how we're describing our methods of research and also how we can eventually disseminate as well. And so without further ado, I will pass the mic back. Go ahead.
Great, thanks, Anjiri. Okay, so now I'm going to walk us through the nitty-gritty of the logistics of actually applying. And we will get to return to your questions as well about eligibility in a moment, but just wanted to make sure that we laid this part out first. So the full request for applications is on our website, and we also have a template document that you can download from the website. So I'm just going to put the web page in the chat right now in case that is helpful for you. The main so the main document is kind of the meatiest portion of this application. So I wanted to walk through the different elements that should be in this document, which is limited in length to 3 pages, single spaced. So first is the statement of purpose. So this is where we'd love you to describe your goal with the grant. You know, what is the big picture need or gap that you intend to fulfill? How do you define success? So here, linking to the review criteria of impact, this is where, you know, we hope you define the impacts that you hope your activities will ultimately have on social care research, partnerships, and or racial health equity. And how will you measure success? What are your plans to track progress towards those impacts? The second element is describing the people and organizations that are involved in your application. So helping us understand what the relevant professional or lived experience is of those individuals, expertise or previous experience with community-based participatory research, patient engagement, partnering with community if you're a researcher, or partnering with academics if you're the community partner applicant. And that is either, you know, part of or separate from the initiative that you hope to support through the grant, as long as it helps us better contextualize the experience that the different applicants in your application are coming to this project with. It should be included. That a subsection of this is, you know, understanding kind of what are the previous partnerships, partnership activities that those organizations and individuals involved in this application have already engaged in, and how you hope for it to evolve with the planned activities, you know, which may not be something you would include, obviously, if it's a new partnership, but if it is established, we would want to know about these activities. And then the third component of the main document is the planned activities. Tell us what you are planning to do, and please give us a sense of the timeline and your respective roles as partners in the activities. And then that's the last part of this that we ask, is that you then connect the activities to the impacts so that we can understand how it all fits in the bigger picture in your statement of purpose. So that's the main document. In the same downloadable template, you also have the budget and the budget justification. So I'm going to lay out the budget now. So the requested budget can be up to $50,000 total. That includes indirect costs, and that should be spent within a 24-month activity period, which runs from November 1st of this year to October 31st of 2025. And so in the budget, we've created a template for you to have a separate budget from each applying organization. So we ask that you do map those separately. And we will be looking in the budget at the compensation for individuals with lived experience. So if this is not an element in your budget, I'll explain later, it should be, we need to see where it's coming from in the budget justification if the funding is being provided through another source. And there is a fair market value calculator that was developed around how to compensate individuals with lived experience for different types of roles and in different settings. And we can give the link in the chat in a couple of minutes, but you can also find it linked from the request for applications, both on our website and the PDF version. No more than 12% of the funding can be for indirect costs, so facilities and administration. And there are a couple other constraints, obviously to not use funding for duplicative programs or purposes, and to not use the funding for journal fees for publication. And then in the budget justification, which we ask that you limit to 1 page, please describe the costs, the roles for personnel, and how you arrived at the amount that you requested in the budget. If you have any cost sharing, please describe that in the budget justification. And please do explain the breakdown of why and how costs are distributed between applicant organizations if you're submitting a joint application. And then, oh yes, and so this is a little bit of what I was describing with individuals with lived experience. Please describe how they will be compensated, whether in this budget and or through other funding sources. Okay, that was a whirlwind and happy to take questions about that. But before doing so, wanted to reiterate, as you likely saw from the emails and the RFA, applications are due on the 31st of July. Hoping that this gives enough time between now and then to develop your application. We will notify grantees the very beginning of October so that we can start activities in November, on November 1st. All right. We are going to open it back up for your questions, and I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Bring my colleagues back in. All right, there we go. Danielle, were there any questions from the chat that you wanted to focus on? But as we get
There are a number of great questions in the chat. And so, you know, some of these you've seen us starting to answer. You know, one we've seen a few times is, will this recording be available and the slides available? Yes, absolutely. We'll be posting this to our website. We can send this out, and we do encourage you to share that with any of your partners that weren't able to come here today. There's also a few questions related to IRB and IRB considerations. And so hopefully those responses in the chat have helped to clarify, but if not, please let us know. I think that there's a number of great questions of, you know, around some specific scenarios, and some of these we may, you know, want to record and get back to you with a personal email afterwards, as we might have a couple of follow-up questions to inquire more. But we could take, I think, a few live questions, and then there's a few that I'm going to be, I can answer them live, or I can keep typing in my responses. Was there anyone who really wanted to raise their hand and ask their question live?
And while we wait for folks to start, oh, Leslie, and Leslie, I was going to answer your question.
Yeah, I was too.
That was great.
Go for it.
Trying to avoid the red tape that can happen through academia and huge organizations.
So yes,
Cash is often preferred to gift cards, so by partners.
Yeah, Danielle, I mean, my sense is that, like, once we grant you the funds, like, it's your organization's policies that come into effect. Personally, if I were you, I would not want UCSF to be in charge of administering that, because our processes are rather complicated and slow.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well, is that this small grant would be awarded to the applicant organization or organizations, And so there may be as Yuri was describing, there may be one budget if there's only a sole applicant organization, or if it's a partnership. And we love to see that, dual budgets and the breakdown of that. And so you would be administering stipends or any payments to individuals with lived experience, and that would be based on your organization or partnerships guidelines. So I very much support cash and hope that your organizations would support that or something that's a close equivalent, and happy to think with you more on that, but your organization would ultimately get to decide.
That sounds great. Thank you.
And let's see, is it Brisa or Brisa who just put in a great question in the chat? Do you want to say a little bit?
Yep, Brisa. That was good.
Brisa.
Yeah, I guess I can ask my question. There's some interest with a national organization that supports faith community nurses who are doing a lot of social related work. So I was just wondering if we could partner with a national organization that is supporting local implementation and possibly identify some of those folks with lived experiences across different geographic areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That sounds part. So is it that you're identifying as a social care researcher role or your group, and then you'd be partnering with a national organization that would be in the community role? Is that right?
Correct.
Great. Yeah. And as long as then they're engaging individuals with lived experience. Yeah, that sounds wonderful. And that your question really highlights another question that might come up for individuals that I haven't seen yet, which is about geography. Like, should this be locally based in a specific community? Should it be geographically based? Should it be national? We're really open. There's no, as long as it's within the United States, there's no limitations there. So thank you for that great question.
Danielle, I also wanted to surface up another question in the chat that I think is really good from Erin. She writes, our nonprofit Center for Health Research and Transformation was interested in using this grant to help develop a community advisory board to transcend our various projects and research. Since we're such in preliminary stages in incorporating lived experience, are we ineligible?
Great question. So, Erin, can you tell us a little bit more then about where are you? I'm such a visual person that sometimes I don't track it all auditorily. Are you identifying as a community partner and you're wondering about where the research fits in or how much it needs to? Am I understanding right?
So, yeah, we are the social researchers.
Oh, got it.
And we're in very, very, very preliminary stages of trying to develop a community advisory board with lived experience, but
Great.
we were anticipating to hopefully, leverage this grant in order to, make that more robust. But because we're not quite there yet, I'm just, wondering if we're ineligible.
No, I would say this is fantastic. And, what you're describing is really, where we see a great need and what we feel like can move this field. So I would encourage an application. And so, we are considering both already developed partnerships as well as those new partnerships. And so, one thing to consider would just be the more that you can describe to us how you think you will form and go about forming and selecting and building that relationship with your lived experience experts, the more the better. And so if you have a process that you can describe for that, or if there's any funds that you feel like you additionally need in the budget for forming that relationship or support to form that relationship, that would be great to include.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle.
Absolutely.
I see a question from Leslie Simon asking if we can define or give examples of what we mean by healthcare sector strategies. In our definition of social care, asking if this is strictly clinical healthcare settings or if this can include social service CBOs where social care is provided. And I think, yes, it can include it. I think though we would want to, because I saw in your earlier sort of iteration of this question, that it was about informing mental health care services. And so I would want to have like a little bit further conversation with you about the activities and the impact of that on social care research specifically, because it's really about including individuals with lived experience in informing, interventions that are based in the healthcare sector to identify and address patients' basic resource needs like food insecurity, housing instability, financial strain, transportation barriers. And that can be an expansive list, but that is our ultimate goal and focus. So it's less about like this setting is in, this setting is out, and more about like, are the activities going to meet that ultimate goal? I also see a question from Amy Breland about the Pathways Community Hub, where a lot of the community health workers are actually former recipients of services. And so they wear both hats of being social care practitioners and individuals with lived experience. To me, that's an amazing population to engage in as part of this partnership. So I do think that you can consider that population. Yes.
Oh, awesome. Thanks, Yuri.
And Laura, I see your hand raised.
So thank you. I'm just gonna toss an idea out there and see what y'all think. So I live and work in Northwest Michigan, up near the Traverse City area. I'm actually in God's country. And I work with Michigan Indian Legal Services. We are a legal services corporation funded entity. And our focus is on meeting the legal needs of our tribal members. We've got 12 federally recognized tribes within Michigan. And in the last couple of years, the Michigan legislature amended our clean slate statute, which provides that folks can set aside more convictions. And there's been a study done out of the University of Michigan, probably, I think it was published 2 years ago, might have been 3 years ago, in which setting aside convictions was shown to really improve the employment opportunities, mostly for women, but for men as well. And my thought and my theory is that we need to be looking at this from a social determinants of health perspective. And we know that criminality is dictated by the social determinants of health. We also would like to take a look at, with clients we've successfully set aside convictions for, to see how and where and what their lived experience has been subsequent to setting aside their convictions. How has life changed for them? Are they able to increase their income? Are they able to afford better food, fresher food, better housing, and better educational districts? Those kinds of things. And we have partnered with an academic in Detroit, out of the Detroit area, who herself is also a tribal member as well as an attorney and a researcher. So would this be something, I mean, it'd probably almost be retrospective and review, but would this be a project that y'all would consider, or what are your thoughts?
Thank you so much. It's so fascinating learning about the different partnerships. And so there was a lot of great information you shared. And if you were to summarize of like what the key goal in terms of how it could impact social care research, what might you say? Like, not to put you on the spot, but what might you say?
Well, I think there's a knowledge vacuum there. I have not been able to find any literature that supports well, let me back up. There's some literature out there, it's very sparse, like maybe 2 articles, in which the question of whether or not expungements and setting aside of convictions should be considered a social determinant of health. And those 2 articles, one's out of Canada, and I've actually talked to the attorney that authored that. And my sense is that yes, convictions should count as a social determinant of health, as should expungements. But again, trying to figure that out and trying to implement that, nobody's really looked at that whole issue beyond the study out of the University of Michigan of 3 years ago with just employment related kinds of findings. So I guess what I'm suggesting is looking at making a determination about whether or not convictions or the setting aside of convictions should be considered a social determinant of health. And assuming the answer is yes, then what impact does that have on folks in their lived experience? Do things get better for them? Or is it just kind of a, it's a feel good kind of thing? They no longer have to admit to having a criminal record. I guess that's kind of where I'm thinking right now.
Yeah, Laura, I would say go for it. That sounds definitely in the right direction for what we're looking for in terms of what we're hoping to see from applicants. So please go ahead and submit and kind of describe your entire scenario in depth, and make sure to highlight the partnership that you plan to have with those with lived experiences. I think that definitely, since there is not as much prior research done in this particular space from what you've highlighted, I think it's even more important for you to kind of like establish like what partnerships you plan on engaging. So yeah, we look forward to seeing that.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
No problem. I wanted to kind of piggyback on another question that has come up a few times in the chat from Kevin originally about whether or not a single organization can submit multiple proposals and receive multiple awards. I'll actually have Danielle or Yuri jump in to address that.
Yeah, so great question. And where we're at on that is that we don't want to limit you by organization and make you decide internally on just one application. So we are open to receiving multiple applications from a given organization. It may take the form of different partnerships or a sole applicant. So yes to multiple applications by organization. We do feel that that it is unlikely. There was a second question, I believe, around funding connected to that. We do feel that given the very limited number of awards and what really, where we're seeking to make the most impact in the most types of partnerships and the most individuals impacted, that it would be, we're not seeking to have multiple awards go to the same organization. So we do leave that with each of you for consideration of whether you want to internally in your organization decide upon one application or submit multiple.
Thanks, Danielle. And then the last question that we'll take live before launching the poll, because we really want to make sure there's some time built in for that, is Whitney Thurman's question: should this be presented as a pilot study so that we include plans for seeking further funding as part of the impact? And I think it's less like a should than a could. And the answer is like, yes, it definitely could. Rather than being a pilot study, it could be like a pilot initiative or effort. So you can think of it as like, this is preparatory to having a community informed and engaged research question that you then, apply for a grant, or it could take another form entirely. But what we would love is to see the activities in this grant be a building block for further engagement, deeper engagement, and potentially that could take the form of community-based participatory research or other forms. Danielle, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much for your great questions. I will launch the poll right now. We would like to just have some information from you about, what you're thinking now after this information session, if you are thinking of applying, and any further questions that you have so that we can make sure to get in touch with you about your specific situations. I think there are some folks from the chat that we will be following up with directly. And as you fill that out, I'm just going to share the screen again one more time, and let you all know about how to stay connected with us. So our website is probably the best venue. That's where you can get all the information about the applications, etc. But you can also sign up for our newsletter. We promise we're not spammy. We send out a monthly newsletter with a research roundup about social care research, as well as announcements. Oh no, I'm so sorry that there's a problem with the poll. That's strange. Hold on just a second. I'm going to relaunch the poll, but unfortunately doing so will clear those who have already responded. So I'm just going to ask that person. It looked like there was one person to respond again. And apologies for that. Okay. Oh yes, and so when talking about how to connect, we also have a podcast channel. So you can just look for us in your whatever app you use to listen to podcasts, and catch up on conversations on hot topics in social care research. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Please do fill out the poll. It is super useful intel for us. So we really appreciate you filling that out. And let me stop sharing my screen in case it makes it easier to answer the poll. Thank you, everyone. Once you've answered the poll, please feel free to jump off.
Thank you all so much for spending this time with us and for considering an application.
On the behalf of the advisory committee, we also really, really appreciate all of the participation here. Thank you.